Thank you. So we're going to start with something unconventional. Hope you don't mind, because that's who I am. So I'd like everyone to stand. We've been in our head now for a while, okay? So somebody just asked me the question about feeling points on animals, and how do you do it, and what process do you go through, and I can't feel certain things. And one of the things I do with every patient I see, I make sure that I'm here and not here. And I think that happens so often. We get caught up in here, feeling like, oh my God, what should I be feeling? I'm not feeling, oh my God, and this cycle starts. So what I do before every single patient I see, every single patient, I go into my heart. Okay? So this is just what works for me. I recommend that each of you develop your own practice. Now, I didn't develop this, what I do, as I walked in the exam room. What I do now, I did it through work at home, through some meditation. Don't let that word scare you. And I developed what felt right to me. I meditate laying down. How's that? Okay? I've been doing that for 20 years. And it works for me. If I read, someone that talks about meditating, they'd say, oh my God, that's the wrong way. There is no wrong way. Just find your way. So what I do before I walk in the exam room, I imagine, Chinese medicine, yang energy from heaven entering my head, yin energy from the earth moving up to my feet. I imagine them meeting in the middle, and I have a doorway in my heart. And I see that doorway opening. Boom, it's open. And this combining of energy goes out. And what happens is it gets me out of this. I could have the worst day going on. When I walk into that room, I am fully present every single time, without question. So that client and that animal knows that I'm there for them, no matter what else is going on. And I'm convinced it's one of the reasons why I hear over and over again, especially with cats, clients will say to me, oh my God, what is happening here? How come my cat is being so good? And I believe that because I'm fully present with that animal who we all know has incredible ability to sense what we're feeling. So, okay. So if you could all just kind of do that, just imagine, again, I know I explained it, but we're going to do it one more time. So imagine the yang energy. Take a couple of deep breaths. Let's do that. So again, I'd like you to imagine the yang energy from heaven entering the crown of your head. Feel it flowing down, filling you. Imagine the yin energy from the earth moving up through your feet. You can feel it as it rises. And you can feel this mingling in your torso. You can feel it. You can feel how powerful it is. And imagine your heart opening and that beautiful energy spiraling out. How's that feel? Okay, sit down. Had one comment at the break about Western medicine, and some people are doing quote alternative or non-conventional, whatever you want to call it, only and nothing else. And they have gone down, and that's what they do, that's how their brain works, and that's it. But most of us who are trained in Western medicine have that voice over here that's constantly reminding us about our Western medicine roots. I remember sitting in the IVIS course again, and that first day, I heard the speaker say, well, welcome to this new world that you're about to enter. I'm sorry, but everything you've ever learned just put aside. Because this medicine that we're going to do is a different language. It's different. And you can't do Chinese medicine if Western medicine is here. And I fought that tooth and nail because I didn't believe it was true. And that's, again, one of the reasons why I do what I do, because I want to marry the two. I want to explain to the Western part of me, what am I doing? I want to understand from the Chinese medicine part of me, what am I doing? I don't want to ignore either one. So, anyway. So again, we just talked about Jack. Jack is a pretty cool dog. So now we're going to talk about Tai-Yin. Tai-Yin, if we can summarize it into 2 words, is about absorbing goodness in the body. That's what it's about. So we talk about the lung holding the office of minister in Chinese medicine. And we know that the breath is at the center of existence. And it's a connection between body and spirit. We don't talk much about spirit in Chinese medicine, in veterinary medicine, I should say. And Chairman Mao in the 60s took away spirit, basically, from Chinese medicine. He didn't want that as part of it. So it lost its importance. It's still important. So obviously, the lung exchanges carbon dioxide from water. The lungs are called the delicate organ since they consist of an extremely thin membrane suspended in blood, and they're damaged by dryness. So as the lungs transfer oxygen to blood, they also change the nature of blood. And this is something we don't remember. The lungs actually clean the blood like their paired organ, the spleen. The lungs clear dampness through the release of toxins. This word toxin is interesting to me, okay? Because, again, my Western training talks about toxins like I think of a poison, poison. And a toxin in Chinese medicine is anything that's present in the body in larger amounts than it should be. If we think of it that way, it's not necessarily some extraneous bad thing. The toxin we're talking about here is carbon dioxide. Okay? So what happens when we get an exchange of oxygen in the lungs, we also get release of carbon dioxide from the blood. When we don't get release of carbon dioxide from the blood, that causes fluid to be retained in the vasculature. Because it has an osmotic effect. So again, we talk about the lungs releasing water. Okay? So obviously the lungs receive 100% of the cardiac output. They receive venous blood flow, which is slower, more stagnant, and as we know, more tendency to clot. So if there are small clots that are present in the blood, they can lodge in the lungs and really not be a problem. Obviously, big clots in the lungs are a big problem. So they can actually act as sort of a protector for the cardiovascular system by holding on to small clots. So we talk about the job of the minister as protecting the emperor, the heart, from himself and filtering what he receives from his subjects. So we just all took a deep breath. And what happened when I can guarantee you our heart rates went down. So the lung grows out of the gut. Same embryological origin. And it grows from a place that eventually becomes the larynx. So again, the lung's origin, like the spleen, is from the endoderm, from the yolk sac. And we don't think of that. The lungs, unlike all the other organs in the body, once they start forming, they continue to grow on their own. They don't need connection to the rest of the body. That's not my information. That's researched information. So again, the lungs are obviously very much associated with blood from the heart, but there is a fascial barrier between them and the blood. So the blood, they don't mix. The primary fascial connection in the lungs is through the fascia. So I was always confused about why lung 1 is where it is. Why is it there? But that's because that's the fascial plane. Okay? So one of the surgeries, and again, there's a connection between the larynx and the lungs. The larynx and the lungs are intimately connected. So one of the things that they're doing now with robotic surgery is they take out thyroid tumors by going through the chest wall and going up the fascial plane right up to the thyroid instead of going here. So that happens, that's in human medicine, they do it a lot. So there's a very big connection with lung and larynx. So again, here's the lung channel, we all know. So the spleen, in Chinese medicine, we talk about its ability to think our ability to think clearly. This is one of those ones I never understood, and we're going to talk more about. It holds blood in the blood vessels. What the heck does that mean? Holds blood in the blood vessels. We all say, well, it governs transformation and transportation of food. Okay, we can accept that. If we look at the spleen as the whole digestive system, then yeah, that makes sense. In Western medicine, we talk about the spleen as the organ which filters red blood cells and white blood cells. So the pancreas and spleen grow from the duodenum, again, endoderm. It's located in the pararenal in the tie-in, but it has a relationship, the pancreas has a relationship with the liver. The spleen and the pancreas share an arterial blood supply and have the same venous drainage. So they represent the spleen yin and the spleen yang. The pancreas obviously releases digestive enzymes, what we will call the digestive fire, to transform the food. The spleen regulates how quickly that happens via the hormone serotonin. So the pancreas provides the digestive enzymes and the hormone, obviously amylase and lipase and insulin, that allows for transportation of food. The East and the West agree that dampness can result from accumulation of fluid related to the heart and the kidneys. But we talk about dampness all the time with the spleen. Another thing that I haven't been real clear on. What does that mean? What does dampness mean? What does it mean? So what I'm going to say to you is spleen yang deficiency is a dampness of impaired metabolism rather than inability to move fluids. So again, this Western brain thinks of dampness as, fluid. It's this fluid involved. Spleen yang dampness results in this change in complexion, and underactive pancreas allows for accumulation of that word toxins again, and fluid. So dampness, because dampness really is about impaired metabolism, when metabolism is impaired, we get buildup of toxins. Then those toxins, because of their osmotic effect, that's where we get fluid buildup. So dampness, inability of the spleen to work correctly, slows down metabolism, which prevents normal clearing of toxins and fluids, and then it's a vicious cycle after that. We all hear about phlegm. Phlegm is just dampness that's been exposed to heat. So the smooth flow of blood flow in the vessels require that the red blood cells are able to deform. The red blood cells are bigger than the capillaries. We all know this from basic physiology. And they can move through the capillaries because red blood cells can deform. Dampness, or again, impaired metabolism, restricts the movement of blood through these tiny blood vessels. So I just put this in here. We're going to talk more about serotonin in a minute. Spleen 4 specifically has an effect on serotonin, which is found in both the brain and the GI tract. So Chinese medicine teaches us that the spleen keeps blood in the vessels, allows for clear thinking, and ensures transformation and transportation. Serotonin, which we're about to get to, has a great influence there. So the majority of serotonin in the body is located in the GI system. 99% of the serotonin in the blood is located in the platelets. So the platelets are very rich in serotonin. And as we know, the spleen stores and destroys platelets. It actually can hold up to 1/3 of the platelets in the body. So because the platelets are so high in serotonin and the spleen contains so many platelets, serotonin influences several things in the body. So serotonin causes vasoconstriction, and it has this transporter called SERT, sodium-dependent serotonin transporter, which is present in the platelets. When the platelets take up serotonin, that serotonin is either put into granules in the platelets or it's degraded. Drugs like SSRIs can affect the platelet serotonin and have an influence on clotting. So when people with clotting issues, they're very careful not to use some of these medications that affect mood because it can affect clotting. And that's the reason, because the platelets are loaded with serotonin. So because the spleen stores and regulates serotonin through the platelets, it plays a role in the amount of insulin released to transport food. We don't often think of this relationship. We don't often think of the spleen playing a role in how the pancreas digests food, but it does. So it plays a role in regulating platelets and clotting, and high levels can cross the blood-brain barrier and affect clear thinking. So again, we talk about the spleen involved in clear thinking, and the connection is serotonin. Who'd have thunk?
To make your thinking better?
It depends. But that's where the connection is. And as I said, it has an influence in how the GI tract is transporting food. And it affects the pancreas about how it's releasing insulin.
If you've had a splenectomy, are there other organs that can pick up some of these functions?
Yeah, it's mainly the liver that ends up doing that. But yeah. So normally, platelets and red blood cells have a negative charge on their surface. There are structures within the spleen called the cords of Billroth, which I'm going to show you in a minute. And they are the filtering mechanism in the spleen. They too are negatively charged. So perhaps when we are doing acupuncture, we're affecting the charge in the spleen, which is influencing the function. When platelets or red blood cells are diseased, they become positively charged and they're attracted to these cords. So this is I tried to reproduce this, but it's not easy. So here we have arterial blood coming in. These are the cords of Billroth. And those cords are negatively charged. And the red blood cells, when they're healthy, are negatively charged. So they're not attracted to these cords. And they go through this filter-like mechanism, and they continue through the venous blood. when they are diseased, when the red blood cells are diseased, when they become positively charged, they get hung up on the cords of Billroth, and they don't pass through. So in animals with hemolytic anemia, for instance, where the red blood cells are so abnormal, it changes the charge on the red blood cells. They get attached to the cords of Billroth, and we get spleen enlargement because the spleen is now holding so much blood. I always wondered why that happens, but it does all the time. For those of you who are really old, like me, one of the old treatments for hemolytic anemia was removing the spleen. Not a good idea. So, okay, so this is Ringo. So Ringo has Cushing's disease. Resting cortisol of 11. I didn't do an ACTH stimulation on this dog. I didn't think I needed to. Okay. Resting cortisol of 11, classic, panting, water drinking, appetite, everything. This was just a classic, classic dog. This person didn't want to treat this dog conventionally. So she came to me and said, "Can you do anything?" I said, "I don't know. I mean, this dog was very symptomatic. But if you don't want to go down the other route, then we can try." And again, the point here is active points. So we just talked about the relationship between the spleen and the lungs. And this patient, the points that made the most difference were 2 spleen, 1 lung, 1 kidney. Okay? I will often see spleen and lung in the same patient that affect the pulse. Again, this is how I work with my patients. And this dog, so this dog, if I didn't do active points, I would have put the dog on the same herb. That really didn't change what I would have done. Sometimes active points change what the brain says I should be doing with this patient. Sometimes the herb that I use is exactly what I would have done anyway. So this was a damp dog. This dog, I could see that from across the room. This dog had a big, wide, wet tongue, just hot as can be, just exuding heat out of this patient. But again, I didn't necessarily expect to find an active lung point that was going to make a huge difference in the pulse of this dog. And again, my point here is the connection between the spleen and the lung channel. Same embryological origin. So you can even think of it like a continuation. So we have the lung channel in the front part of the body, the spleen channel in the back part of the body. If we're treating a lung point, are we having an influence on the spleen point? And the answer is probably yes. And the reason for that is the fascial connection. It's in the same fascial plane, same embryological origin. When we start to connect those dots, it really can affect how we treat our patients. So this dog, the values really didn't change, but the patient was better. Water drinking less, appetite dropped, not as hot, not as cold seeking, and this patient's still alive. And the owner's happy. The symptoms are better. She didn't want to use meds, so I do integrative medicine. So if that patient walked in the door with a cortisol of 11 and I had my choice, I would have put this dog on meds and herbs and monitored it closely because I think we'd have better control. But the owner's happy, I'm happy. Okay, we're going to move on to Shui Yin and the pericardium. So the pericardium grows from the part of the embryo called the pleural pericardial folds, which originate at the front of the chest. And those folds separate the chest from the abdomen, and they form the diaphragm. Above the diaphragm, they form the pericardium. Below the diaphragm, they are the direct development of the liver. So the pericardium and the liver have the same embryological roots. How many people knew that? I didn't know that. So when we're treating the pericardium channel or we're treating the channel, we're influencing that other channel. I guarantee you. So all the organs, except the heart, have two layers of fascia, the one that's attached to the organ and the one that's around it. The pericardium has three layers. The third layer is the extremely tough layer on the outside. In Chinese medicine, we know that the pericardium protects the heart from damage and invading pathogens. But we've also talked about how fascia is so rich in collagen, which is piezoelectric. So perhaps the pericardium not only physically protects against pathogenic, physically protects the heart, but perhaps it forms an electrical barrier around the heart. That's what I wrote here. So, in addition to that, every time the heart beats, the collagen fibers that surround it are also, they're producing micro current of electricity, like everywhere else. So again, I'm proposing that the pericardium not only protects the heart physically, but also electrically, or chi-wise, if you will. So the pericardium, here's more I didn't know, is more than just the fascia around the heart. It, embryologically, is the same cells that form the coronary vessels. And it wraps around the lung to make the pleural membranes that are involved with the venous return to the heart. So we have these connections between liver, pericardium, lung. And we start to understand that more, we see the relationships that Chinese medicine talks about. So the diaphragm forms very early and is formed from three different parts. The exact parts don't matter, but we know the anatomy. So these folds, the pleural pericardial folds that form from the chest wall, that's the reason why the pericardial channel starts on the chest wall, because that's the origin of these pleural pericardial folds that form the diaphragm, that form the pericardium. Obviously, below the diaphragm, the peritoneal channel, everything that surrounds the organs, that surrounds the intestines, is surrounded by this fascia. So this is a picture of the dog diaphragm, just illustrating there's the different parts of the diaphragm. But again, it's just a reminder that the diaphragm, the liver, and the pericardium are all connected. So the Zhuoyin channel starts in the front at the middle digit, goes to the chest, enters the pericardium, crosses the diaphragm, enters the liver. Then it passes down the abdomen and emerges at the femoral canal. So again, all of these connections are there because of the fascial channels and the embryological origins of the cells. So this is just a reminder of where the channels are. Okay. So we're going to talk about the liver. The liver stores blood. What the heck does that mean? So actually the liver can contain about 15% of the blood's body. And it can release blood during exercise or when there's excess bleeding. So obviously in the developing embryo, the veins bring blood back to the heart. And these vessels coalesce to form where the liver eventually forms. And the liver grows around them. So the liver's root is from these blood vessels, grows around these blood vessels. And these cells, this is the membrane in the liver is called the sinusoidal membrane, which we're going to show a diagram of in a second. So these cells, the sinusoidal membrane of the liver, are the same cell, they have the same origin of the cells of the peritoneum. So the cells that line all the organs in the abdomen have the same embryological origin as the sinusoidal membrane in the liver. And the electrical charge across this membrane is vital in its function. So when we talk about liver chi, I'm going to propose to you that we're affecting the charge across the membrane in the liver. We're talking about biological electricity. So when we needle, I believe, we are influencing the electrical charge. So the liver takes nutrient-rich blood, separates it, moves the plasma through holes in this membrane I talked about into what's called the space of Dis, which I'll show you in a minute. So the liver clears blood of toxins. Again, they can be metabolites in higher amounts. They can be other things that aren't supposed to be in the body. The liver clears the blood of toxins, metabolizes fuel into energy, and adjusts the thickness of blood through clotting factors. Three things emerge from the liver: bile, lymph, and purified blood. The liver produces 25 to 50% of the lymph that enters the thoracic duct. I didn't know that. So it has a great influence on the lymphatic circulation. So this is, again, a diagram of what I've just talked about. So we have the blood coming in. This is the membrane that I talked about, sinusoidal membrane. And in this space, the space of Dis. So there's three different fluids that come out of the liver. Sorry, this is blurry. I think I messed that up. The bile in the bile duct. We have the lymphatic duct. And then we have clean blood coming out of it. So the liver takes the nutrient-rich blood from the tie-in and removes the toxins, debris, and bacteria. The liver contains the highest level, did I see it in here? There it is. Kupfer cells. Okay. Contains the highest level of Kupfer cells, which scavenge bacteria. And obviously this is important in the liver's function. The liver also removes large molecules and transport them to that space that we call Dis. And that includes fats. When that mechanism, when that metabolism, when fat absorption is not normal, the lymph becomes thick and does not move normally. And I believe this is at least part of what we call stagnant liver chi, when we have abnormal fat accumulation or fat metabolism in the liver. The holes in the membrane that we talked about actually open and close depending on the condition. And again, I believe that when we talk about liver chi stagnation, those openings are not open. They're not working. And when we needle these patients, we're influencing that. The liver regulates glucose metabolism and mitochondrial energy production. It spreads chi. All right. So we talk about the liver ensuring smooth flow of chi. What does that mean? So we know that the liver is linked to every organ of digestion via the portal venous system. It connects to the diaphragm, esophagus, stomach, and pancreas through the ligaments. So blood goes from the organs of digestion to the heart, and when the liver is not working well, the pressure in the portal system will build up, and we can get accumulation of fluid in the peritoneum. So when ascites occurs, the liver is not helping with the smooth flow of chi. We talk about, again, liver and blood stagnation. The liver is not doing its job. So we talk about the chi flowing in the fascial planes. We've talked about the channels. The largest fascial plane in the body is the peritoneum. And the liver is responsible for clearing fluid out of the peritoneum, for ensuring the smooth flow of qi. We call the liver the general. If portal blood flow is reduced, we may not see liver enzyme elevation, but we certainly will see its effect on digestion. Because, again, if the qi, if the energy is not flowing normally through the peritoneal cavity, digestion won't be normal. We talk about wind with the liver, and we talk about the liver hating wind, and wind being insubstantial. What does that all mean? Qi normally has unobstructed flow, and Chinese medicine describes wind as things like epilepsy, tremors, shaking, itching, and problems that move around the body. Most of the wind disorders are neurological in origin. There's not any physical changes to the body, but we have physiological changes. There's abnormal movement of energy. So wind is most serious when it affects the blood. And epilepsy, of course, is one of the most dramatic examples of wind, a wind that has entered the blood level. So this concept of wind has always a little bit baffled me. And I know, because I was taught, it's associated with the liver. But isn't it interesting, and I think many of us think of this, but when animals are actually on anti-seizure medication, we get elevation in liver enzymes. We're actually activating the liver. So we treat wind seizures with medications that actually increase the function of the liver. So when we get elevation of enzymes from anti-seizure drugs, is that a bad thing? Because what happens is people will, there'll be veterinarians who will prescribe them, and they'll check blood levels to make sure that the liver enzymes are not too high. And then if they get too high, they switch medications. Does it really make sense? If the liver controls wind. So what is epilepsy? Is it a disease of neurons? It is a disease where there's an issue with the blood-brain barrier. The brain is really one. We have a network of blood capillaries and a network of neurons. One of the hormones that is known to damage the blood-brain barrier is histamine. We can also think of histamine as this hormone of irritation. And histamine affects the blood-brain barrier in two ways, depending on the receptor type it stimulates. So we're all familiar with antihistamines. Antihistamines work at these receptors called H1 receptors. If the H1 receptors are activated, the blood-brain barrier is less permeable. So when we talk about antihistamines, we actually are blocking that effect, and the blood-brain barrier becomes more permeable. So some animals, and especially children that have seizures, if they are put on antihistamines, the seizures can be worse. And that's true of animals as well. The drugs that affect H2 receptors, like omeprazole, which is a drug I think I've used, but I don't know for sure. So omeprazole works at the H2 receptor, which is mostly in the digestive system. And if something activates the H2 receptor, the blood-brain barrier is more permeable. So drugs like omeprazole, which block H2 receptors, make the blood-brain barrier less permeable, if that makes sense. Thanks. So H1 blockers can make epilepsy worse. H2 blockers do not, and actually can prevent or help have an anti-seizure effect. So we talk about the liver opening into the eyes, and we speak about liver blood. this is another really confusing thing, or has been for me. Liver blood. I think of blood as, what runs through my blood vessels. But when we talk about liver blood, we're actually talking about plasma. We're not really talking about red blood cells. So when we talk about liver blood being a problem, it means there is a problem with plasma. There's a problem with the proteins in plasma. There's a problem with toxins in the plasma, whatever. So if we look at the eye is nourished by plasma, except for the retina. But the rest of the eye is nourished by plasma. So we talk about the liver, we connect the liver and the eye, and the connection is health of the plasma. Because again, the liver is responsible for producing 25 to 50% of the lymph in the body, which eventually becomes plasma. So what is liver blood? 35 to 55%. In health, 35 to 55% of blood is composed of plasma. That's just I just threw that number down there. So blood contains a large amount of water. And again, the main organ of the body responsible for keeping it clean, free of toxins, is the liver. It adds amino acids, glucose, and fat, and it releases plasma back into the circulation via the lymphatics. It is the plasma portion of blood that correlates with the Chinese medicine concept of liver blood. So the deficiencies of the signs of liver blood deficiency are the signs of something being wrong with the plasma. Heart blood, on the other hand, is blood. And this is a distinction that that was one of those aha moments. Like, of course that makes sense. So deficiencies in heart blood are related to its ability to carry oxygen. So this is Malcolm. 13-year-old golden retriever, liver disease, joint disease, whole spine was a mess. That's why he's getting electroacupuncture here. I think he is. I'm not sure in that picture. But the point of this is, again, with active points, this connection that exists. So the points that made a difference in this patient's, made the most difference in this patient's blood flow were pericardium, liver, and spleen. And again, the point is this relationship between pericardium and liver. When we're treating one of those, we're treating the other one. Again, because of the embryological connection between the two. This patient, interesting enough, when I treated this patient, it improved the pulse, but it also, with PC6, improved appetite and reduced vomiting. My thought is, I used to use PC6 just kind of, it's nauseous, so I'll use it. What I find is it's most effective in patients who are having liver qi issues. Again, because of the connection. I'm not going to have a chance to go through all this, but I am going to, the most important one here. So the bladder channel corresponds to the fascial planes between the muscles, and as we know, the points are named after the organ they're associated with. And the outer bladder points are actually named according to the spirit of their respective organ. So we talked about the middle kidneys developing at the same time of the heart as a series of tiny functioning kidneys that drain what will become the bladder. The middle kidneys explain the position of the bladder channel. That's where the bladder channel is. Let's see. So the bladder channel of Chinese medicine corresponds to the bladder of the primitive middle kidneys. We're going to talk about neural crest cells again. So some of the neural crest cells migrate to the area of the outer bladder meridian, the spirit points, while others migrate to the interior meridian location, the shoe points. So, thanks. The bladder point's origin is neural crest cells. So when we're treating the bladder points, we're treating neural crest cells. We're affecting this connection that neural crest cells have in the entire body. Whether it be in the brain, whether it be, I think I forgot to mention it, the pancreas also has its roots in the neural crest cells. They just atrophy, but they're in the same location as the bladder channel. So every time we needle the bladder meridian, it reinforces the connection between the neural crest cells. So this is Dr. Cohn's diagram, and this is the development of the middle kidneys. And again, it exactly corresponds to the location of the bladder channel that we use. Just I really would like to get to the gallbladder channel, so I'm going to help. Bladder, small intestine, ectoderm, and origin. Okay. One of the things I learned, and this one I did listen to in the IVUS course, is using small intestine 3, bladder 62 for dogs that have back issues. And I've done that for however many years I've been using acupuncture, and I always wondered why it works so well. And again, it works so well because of this embryological connection between the bladder and the small intestine channel. Ectoderm in nature, same cells. I want to show this. Okay. So when we think of the intestines, okay, we think of the intestines being related to the spleen channel. However, because of the way the intestines develop, all layers are present in the intestine. Every one of the 6 layers is represented, all the way from the most outside layer, from the shui yin, to the tai yin on the inside. So when we are treating, any of the 6 layers, we can have influence on the intestines. It's not just about treating the spleen channel. Again, because it's all about embryological development. So we have the shui yin, and all of the layers are represented in the development of the intestines. That's boring. That's not. The one I really want to get to here is the gallbladder. Excuse me. Because we don't realize some of this. So obviously we know where it's located. So the shui yin, the liver takes rich and nutritious fluid and qi and moves it back into the lymph of the Shaoyang. So we get the liver and we get the fluid going back into the Shaoyang. How does that happen? The fluid in the peritoneum is absorbed by something called the cisterna chyli, and it eventually gets to the thoracic duct. And the gallbladder is located right there, right where that duct is located. So there's a connection between the gallbladder and the cisterna chyli, excuse me. The gallbladder channel is responsible for the proper absorption of fats, as we know, through bile, and keeping the lymph clean. So the gallbladder is the organ of lymph and fat. This is the part that I wanted to get to. So the gallbladder and its linked to tendon and fascia. We talk about gallbladder 34, for instance, being so important in that. And we know that the tendons and fascia in the body are bloodless. They are all nourished by lymph. And again, the gallbladder is the channel of the lymphatics. So we're treating the gallbladder channel, we're treating the lymphatic channel. So I find in so many of my patients, I'll just end here, that have a multitude of diseases, the gallbladder points are active in a lot of these guys. So I end up using this Xiao Chai Yu Tong, which has an affinity for the gallbladder channel in a lot of my patients, particularly a lot of my cancer patients. In the specialty practice I work at least half my patients have cancer, if not more. So I'm constantly working. This is a dog, 9-year-old Labrador with lymphosarcoma. They did not want to treat this dog with chemotherapy. They do a lot of that at the specialty hospital I work at. They came to see me. We did diet change, obviously, and some vitamins, different things, acupuncture, and Xiao Chai Yu Tong. This dog, God bless him, 4 years, this dog is still alive. I saw this dog last week. Having trouble with mobility, but the dog is still alive. And this dog is still on this herb. So what I do as I recheck herbs, I continue to make sure that the active points stay the same, that we're influencing blood flow the same way. So this dog's been on this herb the whole time. We were chatting earlier about herbs and biomedical effects. And Xiao Chai Yu Tong, if we look at the components of it, there's several components of it that have anti-cancer effects. So a lot of times, I always choose my herb based on my acupuncture and blood flow. But so often I will then look at the herb and say, why is this herb working in this patient? I'm always asking, why this point? Why is the patient responding? Of course, I'm also asking, why didn't this patient respond? But why? Why is this happening? Why is this herb working so well? And I try, and I'll look at the components, and for this herb in this patient, as I said, there's several components of it that are anti-cancer. So then I'm like, well, okay, my Western voice is happy, my traditional Chinese medicine voice is really happy, and patient and owner are happy. So thank you for your attention.
Finding your visibility in today's climate with website creation, hosting, SEO and social media management, telephone greetings and VoIP services, and online video production.